Hello, and welcome to the Thinkers50 Radar 2022 series, brought to you in partnership with Deloitte. I'm Des Dearlove.
And I'm Stuart Craner. We are the founders of Thinkers50, the world's most reliable resource for identifying, ranking and sharing the leading management ideas of our age, ideas that can make a real difference in the world.
In this weekly series of 45-minute webinars, we want to showcase some of those ideas to bring you the most exciting new voices from management thinking.
So please let us know where you are joining from today and send over your questions at any time during the session.
Our guest today is Antonio Aloisi. Antonio is a Marie Curie Fellow and Assistant Professor of Labour Law at IE Law School in Madrid. His research focuses on the impact of digital innovation on labour regulation and social institutions.
His Boss Ex Machina project aims to map new practices of algorithmic decision-making and assess the adequacy of existing legal frameworks for enabling sustainable data-driven workplaces.
And he's the co-author of the forthcoming book, Your Boss is an Algorithm, Artificial Intelligence, Platform Work and Labour, which is coming out in July 2022, and which offers a compass to navigate the era of radical advancements such as the gig economy, algorithmic management, and digital surveillance.
Antonio, welcome. So let's start with your personal journey. How did you get interested in the digital workplace in the first place?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm connecting from the IE Tower here in Madrid, from our new offices in a wonderful building. And yes, as regards my interest in the topics connected to the digitization of the workplace and the impact of technology on social institutions and more broadly on the labor markets, I guess it started very early. I wrote my dissertation at the university on the role of unions in shaping more friendly workplaces. And then in 2014, I started my PhD journey at Bocconi University in Milan. And I decided to work together with my co-author and then supervisor, Valerio De Stefano, on an emerging topic that was the topic of platform work in the gig economy. In Europe, it was very limited in its dimension, but it was coming. New platforms basically colonizing our urban areas all over Europe, from London to Madrid to Barcelona to Milan. And we realized that despite the much discussed competition issues of new platforms disrupting existing markets, there was something more. And in particular, the most pressing issues were the ones connected to the classification of workers, that is strictly connected to the business model of platforms, but also the emergence of new practices of management of these ubiquitous workplace by means of technologies such as AI, algorithms, and machines, broadly speaking. So, I mean, I worked on these during the PhD journey. I submitted my thesis. I had the chance to discuss these topics with a very large audience because the interest was growing, including at the institutional level. Because as you may know, the European Union, for instance, has been at the forefront of the regulation of technology. There is an ongoing discussion on the approach and the values of the EU institutions that are trying to combine the safeguard of rights with the attempt to unleash innovation. And that's it. I mean, of course, I've been following the debates, monitoring the new advancements, and this is why I ended up focusing on something that is broader than the gig economy itself, because at the moment, algorithmic management is spreading all over the labor market, regardless of contractor classification, regardless of the industry. The pandemic, for instance, has accustomed us to these new devices, and now we would say that, in a sense, we are whole platform workers. For example, we are now using a platform to perform something that is connected to work, or at least to professional experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I love the title of the book. I mean, it's slightly alarming, slightly worrying. You know, your boss is an algorithm. But I mean, we're going to obviously talk about some of the content of the book. But clearly, the pandemic has had a huge has created a huge impetus for this sort of some of these changes that were already taking place. It seems to have really accelerated, the journey towards remote working, which of course, throws a lot of these issues, makes them even more pressing. How have you found, what are you finding that the pandemic has literally driven this faster?
Yeah, so basically everyone is claiming that the pandemic has been an accelerator of pre-existing trends. And this is, of course, true. There were so many underlying aspects of the labor market that have been magnified by the pandemic. In my opinion, and this opinion is also shared, of course, by Valerio De Stefano, my co-author, we are also convinced that the pandemic is offering a window into some futures of work that have arrived previously than anticipated, that are causing some kind of anxiety or interest or curiosity. In our analysis, we find that the pandemic, of course, has facilitated the adoption of new technologies because of the need of being distant, of complying with rules on isolation, and so on and so forth. The pandemic has also somehow shifted the perception, the attitudes toward technology, towards the reliance on technology. Let's think of remote working, remote teaching, food delivery, the digitization of the public administration that has been forced by the pandemic. At the same time, the pandemic has resulted in a profound polarization between two categories of workers, at least, what we call essential workers, frontline workers, that could be also invisible, working in food production sectors, in warehouses, in logistics, and so on and so forth, and remotable activities. We claim, of course, that remote work is here to stay, is also a terrific organizational opportunity to restructure business, to get rid of bottlenecks, to shift towards a system of assessment that is based on deliverables instead of face-time and presentialism. At the same time, there is a hidden side of the coin, that is the relevance of essential workers. At the beginning, at the onset of the pandemic, many commentators rushed to claim that this health emergency would have meant an increase in automation. So many robots, for two main reasons. Because we had to stay home as mandated by the governments, but also because robots never called in sick and they never go on strike, of course. But we have come to realize the importance of the human network that is making our quarantine lives proceeding as smoothly as possible. So instead of seeing an increase in automation, we have realized that workers in these essential workers in essential sectors, from care to assistance to delivery to logistics to food production, are the backbone of our society. Of course, on the other side, remote work is a terrific innovation in terms of reconciling professional and private lives, offering an opportunity to develop new skills, to improve also in terms of collaboration. And we have, looking at data, realized that productivity hasn't dropped during the pandemic. So there are mixed results. We should be concerned with the totality of workers, going beyond the privilege debate on remote work that is at the forefront of the global discussion. But of course, we claim also that the main legacies of the pandemic, including the digital acceleration, the adoption of more intrusive technologies, are here to stay. First, because the investments have been so large that it would be meaningless to go back. And second, because they are going to be somehow assessed in the long run. So while we have some kind of resistance, some managers, some local politicians that are asking people to go back to work, for instance, as if in the last 2 years we've been sliding off, some crucial components, some legacies, some prominent results of the pandemic will be with us in the near future.
Just a reminder, we're joined by Antonio Aloisi, co-author of Your Boss is an Algorithm. Please send in your questions during the conversation. I mean, usually, Antonio, the impact of technology is seen from the perspective of workers losing their jobs to technology, not managers. But your research and your arguments turn that on its head, suggesting that managers are also in the technological firing line. Is that a kind of good summary of your research?
It is. I mean, we have an entire chapter that is devoted to the discussion on the so-called future without work. There are many lines of popular media outlets claiming that we are headed towards a workless society. First, we try to dispel this myth by relying on literature written by economists such as David Odor, for instance. We also follow the trajectory of the debate on automation. Back in the last century, automation was seen as something promising, as the opportunity to emancipate workers, to reduce idle moments, to prevent hazardous activities, and so on and so forth. Then, in the 70s, the debate has somehow shifted towards the basically identification of automation as a peril, as a threat. Robots taking over, robots basically displacing blue collars at the beginning and then white collars. We claim that contrary to these alarmist predictions, activities and professions are here to stay. According, for instance, to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, only 9% of existing jobs could disappear. But what is important to take into account is that 40% of current professions are going to be transformed by technology. This is because technology is not able to basically destroy jobs. Technology can only automate some tasks that are included in more complex jobs and professions. But what is important to take into account is that at the moment, at the global level, we are not witnessing jobs automated away because of the large availability of cheap, precarious, not well-paid activities. So there is an intrinsic limit to automation. The first one is the fact that not all activities can be programmed, can be taught to an algorithm, to a robot, to an electronic device. But the second and more troubling limit is the large availability of humans that are cheaper than technology. And this is a cap on innovation that we should be concerned of. And then there is a second layer of the discussion that is precisely the one that you mentioned, the fact that AI algorithms are pretty good when it comes to replacing, assisting, or at least complementing decisional tasks at the workplace level. So it's not the ordinary job, it's not the ordinary worker that is going to be replaced by AI, but managers are in danger in a sense. So many activities throughout the entire life cycle of human resources management practices at the workplace level can be easily entrusted, assigned to technology. When it comes to hiring, new applicants can be tested online by cameras and other software that are basically used to match them to the existing profiles. Then when it comes to assessment, data are collected, are factored together to elaborate a ranking of workers in a company. And in some cases, technology is not only used to basically describe the performance, but also to prescribe some kind of behaviors and contexts. And in the most extreme cases, technology is also used to fire workers on the basis of the granular and aggregated data that are collected at the workplace level. These tasks, these functions were traditionally within the domain of supervisor, middle managers, employers, bosses, to use a popular expression. They are now assigned to technology. From a legal perspective, what is the problem, if you want, from a philosophical perspective? The existing rules are tested on humans. They have been fine-tuned on humans. Humans have volition, they have accountability, they have responsibility, but the existing controlling factors, the countervailing forces, are somehow displaced by a new form of power, which is more sophisticated from the previous one, from power and authority of the past.
No, it's quite alarming for managers in a certain way when you put it like that. But it seems to me the big shift here is really in how we understand the nature of work and what adds value, and therefore what we measure, what we're trying to control. Because I mean, we know there's been there's talk of an increase in sort of surveillance and even having workers where their number of keystrokes are being measured per hour, but they probably aren't appropriate controls or measures. I mean, they're based on the old kind of model, seems to me, of presenteeism and sitting at your desk, which may not actually be a measure of how valuable you are, how productive you are. Is that fair comment?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, this comment offers us the opportunity to reconnect some seemingly unconnected topics. For instance, the increase of panopticon devices caused by the pandemic, and also the rise of algorithmic management. What is the problem here? Very often, the metrics that are selected to evaluate, to appraise the performance are meaningless. They count or measure something that is not instrumental to a good performance. And this is due to a kind of backwardness in terms of managerial culture. We've seen this during the pandemic, for instance. Workers have been asked to keep the camera open. Workers have been asked to attend so many useless meetings just to praise managers that were basically afraid of losing control of the workforce. In other sectors, in those sectors that I named before as essential sectors, other devices have been introduced to check compliance with hygiene rules. For instance, new tech devices just to check whether workers were cleaning their hands. What does this say? Something brutal about the lack of selection of important metrics. The numbers are to be selected consistently with the goals that are indicated by managers at the company level. So to say something more optimistic, there are several examples of what we call codetermination of metrics also at the workplace level. And workers are in a very good position to offer their know-how when it comes to devising some measurements, some key performance indicators that are able to shape behaviors in a promising, productive way. There are examples of co-determination of company practices, collective agreements, and workers can, together with the management, co-design the systems. They are the first to be impacted. At the same time, very often some metrics are going to impact the workforce at the collective level. So workers are not interested in gaming the system because their colleagues are going to suffer from their non-compliant behaviors. This is to say that probably we need a paradigm shift. Technology is, of course, wonderful. Innovation is here to stay, but we should be trying to avoid this kind of dysfunctional use of technology that is somehow employed to replicate the most troubling hidden or explicit human flaws. And I'm not saying that human bosses are perfect. Actually, they are far from perfect. This is why we should be using technology to avoid, to minimize biases, bottlenecks, non-functional and non-fulfilling company practices.
Yeah, related to what you've just been saying, Antonio, Elizabeth asks a question. What if the measure of success is not productivity? How do we look at the relevance of technology if the aim is not producing more? Will it look different? And Frank Karlberg's got an interest, building on this question. He's curious to know how we should measure success going forward.
Yeah, I mean, these are very complex questions. The first one related to productivity. It is true that this is a very, let's say, universal index that is used to basically measure the performance of companies, but also of states, in a sense. When it comes to selecting the indicators that are factored together to measure it, probably we should broaden our perspective. Very often we rely on quantitative elements, such as the number of emails sent, the number of meetings attended. And this is something that is not correlated to productivity because there are preparatory activities, because there is something that is connected to ideation, to the thinking process, to brainstorming, to the conceptualization of a process that cannot be quantified. So probably the metrics that we have connected to productivity can be leveraged, but they need to be strengthened by looking at something that cannot be measured simply relying on numbers. And this is something that we also called for in the book, going from a quantitative perspective on the future of work to a qualitative perspective. There is something that has to be evaluated thanks to human discretion, thanks to human flexibility. And then how to conceive success. Probably there is something else in terms of legacy of the pandemic. At the beginning, commentators were about to basically predict a decrease in productivity. On the contrary, workers have demonstrated that can stay motivated without a manager looking over their shoulders, for instance. The pandemic has also facilitated an upskilling process for so many workers that had to very quickly learn how to use technology, how to rely on platforms, on collaborative tools, on new ways of circulating information. So, I mean, I don't have a solution, of course. I can just contribute to shape some kind of good practice system in a sense. And my key takeaway here is to look for something that is not easily quantifiable.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we have tended. I mean, you're moving more into the positive realm in the last answer, but I think we have sort of been looking at the negative. Frank, with a follow-up question or a prequel, actually says, what opportunities do you see emerging as a consequence of technological changes? I mean, you mentioned a paradigm change. What's the upside of all this? What can we? Where can we see the gains?
Yeah, I mean, we've been witnessing an evolutionary leap in terms of adoption of technology. I mean, our lives are fairly better than the past. So many activities that were impossible are now streamlined thanks to technology in all sectors, from the industry to the agri-tech, food, from the possibility of customizing items before launching a new product. When it comes to computational power, I mean, we not myself, of course, but the world and the experts have been able to develop a new vaccine in months rather than years to cure or at least to mitigate a viral disease that is still threatening the world. So, of course, there are so many crucial advantages, and probably there is something more. The level of improvement that we have seen in different eras and in other sectors when it comes to electrification, when it comes to health, when it comes to finance, this is not totally reflected at the workplace level. So in the introduction of our book, we claim that we need more innovation. We are dealing with a kind of narrow adoption of innovation and technology at the workplace level. If you compare vaccines with food delivery, there is something missing in between. I mean, innovation cannot be a slice of pizza that is delivered by a worker that is underpaid, underprotected, that is hired as an independent contractor, such as a wonderful, let's say, lawyer in a huge law firm. Is this innovation? We should work on the very notion of innovation. I mean, on the one side, crucial, important advancements that are pushing the boundaries of the knowledge, of our safety, of our health. On the other side, if we look at the mainstream approach to innovation, we end up relying on some dodgy business models that are trying to circumvent the law and to sell themselves as something innovative, based on the assumption that innovation is genuine only if it asks for forgiveness rather than permission. So there are so many improvements that we should be able to democratize, in a sense, to bring to the, let's say, affordances of all workers and all citizens in the world. Then we could say that innovation is doing a great job.
Let's talk about the automation of the professional classes, Antonio. How does management compare to, I know like in surgery, they use technology. In the law, we're seeing increasing adoption of technology. So where does management compare with these other professions?
Yeah, I mean, as we discuss in the book, there are several examples of managerial tasks that have been automated. As we said before, from hiring to firing, so many activities are today assisted by technology. There are some limits, there are some legal rules that somehow prevents these from becoming totally automated. At the European level, we can rely on the General Data Protection Regulation, for instance, that includes a ban on automated decision-making processes that result in legal effects or similarly significant effects. When it comes to the notion of automation of the law, automation of the expertise, automation of judgment, we should probably admit that some human activities are not that easily automatable, because they tend to rely on something that cannot be coded, on something that cannot be taught to an algorithm. And that is flexibility, that is normally associated with human decision-making. Discretion is the real perk of human decision-making, and that task, that value, that virtue, I would say, cannot be automated. When it comes to other profession in the health sector, for instance, you see how technology, by relying on a wealth of data, can be a wonderful driver when it comes to assisting the expert that is going to take a final decision, that is going to make the final choice on something that is rather critical. In other professions, there is the risk of technology taking over, in a sense, but at the same time, we are starting to learn, we are starting to witness how dysfunctional these processes are, and many companies are deciding to go back to the normal, or to the previous normal, in a sense, because when it comes to hiring workers, for instance, some metrics, as we discussed before, basically are not a factor of success. If I had to hire someone in my company based on the existing data, then I would be building a replica of what already I have at the company. And this means that I would have a uniform workforce with no diversity, no heterogeneous mindsets. So data can, of course, offer terrific opportunity. They are somehow used in a narrow way. And this is why in hiring, in decision making, they end up reducing the opportunity for competitiveness and productivity.
It's interesting. We had, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but we had Matt Bean on this webinar series a few months ago, and his research was looking at specifically how automation and robotics is affecting actually surgeons, and what he found was that the use of robots is actually having a de-skilling effect on surgeons, because the old way was, with an operation was you would see one, do one, and then teach one. So it was very much a passing on of the baton of understanding. And of course, with the use of robots, people aren't being able to do that. Do you see something like that possibly happening with managers, that there's actually a process of transfer of skills and learning that happens by working with other human managers?
This is true. There is a loss of expertise. And actually, if we look at this, we end up realizing that this is another incentive for automation. So we're dealing with a vicious circle, in a sense, because by reducing specialization, by reducing the level of knowledge, then managers easily become replaceable. So probably to design an insurance against obsolescence, workers and managers should rely on their tacit knowledge, on those activities that represent a kind of non-automatable area within larger occupations. This is true. The parallel that you have drawn with surgeons in terms of reduction of skills, the skilling is constantly happening at the workplace level. If we reduce the self-determination of worker, this is another crucial concept that we try to deliver in our book. If we undermine agency, we are basically destroying the corporate know-how, the level of expertise. On the contrary, basically extending unsupervised autonomy is a way to improve the sense of relatedness, the sense of commitment, the expertise, the efforts, the genuine passion for the goal. Unsupervised autonomy, self-determination, what does it mean? It means offering the opportunity to managers and to workers to independently set the goals that are consistent with the larger project of a company, but also the methods and the ways through which they can be attained. So probably the key message here is that the future of work is not written in stone, of course. On the contrary, if we are able to shape it by relying on autonomy, self-determination, and agency, technology will not be an enemy in the future.
Which is progress, I guess. I know Roger Martin and Alessandro Di Fiore in Harvard Business Review have written about the importance of judgment in organizations, judgment being core to managerial activities. So in 20 years' time, where do you see managers? I know somebody's already made a comment that the Chinese company Hire has practically no managers anymore. So where do you see the management role in 20 years' time, Antonio?
This is tricky. I would say that, first of all, from the past, we've been relying on different types of organization that are less bureaucratic than before, that are somehow horizontal, that are flattened. This was another myth of the past, like a total decentralization of the decision power, a total decentralization of the system of authority. This hasn't happened. We still rely on traditional power, on traditional authority, coupled with this emergence of new technologies. I don't have a profile, let's say, of the manager of the future. I must confess that I've been trained as a lawyer, of course, so this is my very, let's say, brutal background. But I would say that, as we discussed before, there is a trend towards the co-determination of company practices. So we need managers that are not only bosses, but even more importantly, they must be enablers. They must be people that are able to empower workers, to build teams in an unorthodox manner, rather than sticking to the rules on the books. Probably this is another way of keeping managers away from disruption caused by technology. If managers rely on technology, or even if managers transform their jobs and turn themselves into AI systems that are there only to validate a decision that has been partially taken by algorithms and AI or machines, they will easily become redundant, obsolete. On the contrary, if they are able to plan in an unorthodox manner, to again put together workers that are not like-minded, that are able to combine experiences coming from different fields, from multidisciplinary aspects, they could survive these tremendous turbulence.
I mean, it feels like, runaway technology has sort of overtaken organizational structures and policies and metrics and all the things we're talking about, maybe even labor law. How can we keep up with the pace of technology? I mean, or even hope to catch up?
Yeah, this is a great challenge for labor lawyers, and there are several discourses that labor lawyers cannot afford to disregard, from the automation to the potential workless society, to the rise of the technologies that we have been commenting on, to the importance of radical solutions such as the universal basic income or new company practices and collective agreements, but also the possibility of having data-driven environments that are more sustainable, for instance, thanks to transferability, interoperability. Now, labor law is the antibodies that allow the subject to evolve in a very fruitful manner. Why so? Because labor law has been strictly connected to the production system throughout its entire history. So labor law can offer some critical solutions, important solutions to enable authentic innovation. And we should also basically abandon the rhetoric or the narrative according to which the law are here to put constraints on technology. On the contrary, we claim that law in general, but in particular labor law, can basically uphold authentic innovation by providing some kind of tools, for instance, to allow fair competition, to protect the results, to cover industrial products or property. Now, the traditional and very narrow view according to which the rules of the law are an impediment to innovation is a bit outdated. We are witnessing this also in the stock exchanges. All those companies that were supposed to cash in very easily are facing pressures because of their lack of compliance with the rules. And it is too easy to claim that rules are outdated and to disregard them, to circumvent. On the contrary, we need to assess the existing rules in order to adapt or update them. And we have so many examples in the book, Your Boss is an Algorithm, where there is an intimate connection between the rules of the law and the spirit of innovation. Some social institutions, such as the contract of employment, that is something considered as a relic of the past, or even collective agreements that are now facing an upsurge in terms of mobilization, for instance, in the USA, are precisely conceived to support an efficient running of a company. So there is an industrial nature of labor law. Labor law has been conceived not simply as a protective device, but on the contrary, as an organizational tool that is able to strike a balance between protection and organization, between duty and liabilities, between obligations and protections. And authority that is embedded in the contract of employment is the easiest way to basically exercise power of the workforce in a legitimate way by relying on some kind of statutorily or collectively negotiated limits that are meant to basically rationalize, to constitutionalize the power that is somehow tolerated also in private relationships as those between an employer and an employee.
So where does your research go next, Antonio?
At the AILO school, we are about to launch a new center precisely on the automation of the law. We will have an important event, a conference, on the last day of September 2022. So you are all invited to Madrid to join us. We're going to have so many thrilling keynote speakers, and we will be working on this with so many different perspectives together, basically all the faculty at the AILO school, colleagues from private law, from European law, from constitutional law, from law and tech, from e-justice, will be collaborating to understand whether there are some areas of the law that can be automated and how to reconcile these with the existing rules and with the issues such as volition, discretion, and agency that we have been mentioning before. And for the future, I would like to be working on so many, let's say, underlying aspects of labor law, such as the notion of space and time that have been somehow called into question by the pandemic and by the resulting rules that we've been complying with in the last 2 years. But there are important tasks for the future and other endeavors that are very thrilling in a sense.
So the book, I mean, I do love the title, Your Boss is an Algorithm, out in July 2020. So we can all look forward to seeing that. But are you generally optimistic? I mean, you've been very balanced in the way you've put both sides. But are you an optimist in all this? Have we got a bright future, or is it all doom and gloom?
I am an optimist, of course, let's say by nature, but I am an optimist as long as we are able to co-determine the future of technology. This is the most important claim that we try to make in the introduction and also in the final section. We cannot leave this crucial topic to tech pundits, to the innovation cheerleaders. This is a collective challenge and everyone should be involved in this. Politicians, social partners, economic actors. We need to set the rules for the future of work because labor is the most prominent activity of our life. We cannot leave these to some tech giants located somewhere.
Antonio Aloisi, thank you very much. Antonio's book, he's co-author of the book, Your Boss is an Algorithm, available in July, published by Bloomsbury. Essential reading. So please order your copy today. Next week, we'll be joined by Robert Livingston. So thank you very much, Antonio, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye.